The story kicks off with a virtual reality game called The New Gate, but things take a dark turn when it unexpectedly transforms into a deadly game. The players are trapped inside, unable to log out, and the grim reality is that dying in the game means dying in real life. Oh, joy. The only way to escape is by beating the game. And we meet Shinya, a guy so determined to make it to the end that he'd probably fight his way out of a paper bag with a dragon inside. We see Shinya ready to challenge the final boss of the game while his NPCs, who've clearly never heard of workplace safety, tell him to be careful. Shinya starts fighting with the boss, which looks like it ate one too many protein shakes. He manages to cut off its wing, but just like your annoying younger sibling, it regenerates. So, he decides to attack faster, turning into a whirlwind of swords and witty one-liners. He manages to get its HP low, and it tries to regenerate again, but he delivers the finishing blow with all the grace of a cat knocking over a glass of water. He gains several titles like Wingslayer, HP Terminator, and The Guy Who Finally Did It. And the game system announces that the final boss has been defeated, so the players can finally log out and maybe get some therapy. He checks his scroll to see the players leading the game until he's the last one left. He prepares to leave, but plot twist, a gate suddenly opens, leaving him more confused than a chameleon in a bag of Skittles, since the boss was the last event of the game. He wakes up in a field outside and wonders what happened. It seems too real to be a game, and he's not even in Kansas anymore. So, he checks his window, because that's a normal thing to do, and realizes his stats have increased thanks to the titles he received after defeating the boss. He tries to log out again, but can't find the option. He tries to see if anyone is online, but he has no network connection. Now he's really puzzled, wondering how he's playing without internet. He uses an item to find his way home, but on the way, he sees a city that wasn't there before because, new cities just pop up all the time, like mushrooms after rain. He sees his house, but notices a girl in need of help as some guys drag her out of a barrier. A monster suddenly appears, so they run away faster than a cat from a cucumber. But Shinya manages to save the girl. They go inside the house, and the girl introduces herself as Tierra, thanking him for saving her. She thinks he's a friend of her master, but Shinya doesn't know who she's talking about. Tierra mentions that everyone knows Shay from the Moon Sanctum, and he becomes surprised because Shay is one of his support characters. Shinya notices Tierra is suspicious, so he explains they're old friends and asks where Shay is. But Tierra doesn't want to tell him because he's a stranger, and let's be honest, he's got "new guy" written all over him. She offers to deliver a message to Shay for the low price of 1,000 jewels. Shinya shows a coin and explains he only has one Gale, like a guy who forgot his wallet on the first date. She wonders if he used an item box because only kings can use one, and she's also surprised by the Gale coin because one of them is worth 10 billion jewels, saying they can be enchanted. But he notes that in the game, one Gale was the smallest amount of money. Tierra wonders who he is, so Shinya explains he's a high human, but he discovers that only 6 high humans existed in the world, and they disappeared 500 years ago during the dusk of prosperity. Shinya is confused, and Tierra wonders how he doesn't know about the historical event where many people disappeared. He thinks she's talking about the mass logout and realizes that thousands of people logging out at the same time became a major incident. It's like the internet crashed and sent everyone to medieval times. Realizing he's been sent 500 years into the future of the game, Shinya thanks Tierra for the history lesson and offers her the Gale as a token of gratitude. She's thrilled to have one because, let's face it, she's been living on pocket lint and dreams. Shinya thinks it will be useful to her since elves are good at magic, but she wonders how he knows she's an elf because Shay put an illusion spell on her. Shinya wonders why Shay would do that, so Tierra reveals that elves with black hair are considered a bad omen. She was expelled from her village for always being attacked by monsters. Shay changed her appearance and brought her to the shop where she could stay safe thanks to the barrier, and she's been living like this for the last 100 years. Shinya realizes why the monster appeared, and she mentions her hair was silver before. He decides to analyze her and discovers she has a curse that manifests randomly. He knows how to undo it and uses purification on her, but he's disappointed that only part of her hair returned to normal. She, on the other hand, is ecstatic and gets emotional. They try to leave the barrier, but they aren't attacked, so she cries tears of joy. Back at the Moon Sanctuary, Tierra explains that Shay will take a while to return, so Shinya decides to visit the city to learn more about this world. Tierra has something to help him enter the city and shows him a letter of recommendation, saying he can use it to pass through the town's checkpoint. He thinks it's too much, but she wants to thank him even more. She promises to let him know when Shay returns, so Shinya thanks her before leaving. He enters the city of Bari, and the guard explains that the letter of recommendation is a big deal because it works in other kingdoms, and he can even get an audience with the king. The guard takes Shinya to the Adventurers Guild, where he tries to register as an adventurer, but the receptionist explains that registrations happen on the first floor. Shinya goes to the first floor and thinks the receptionist looks a lot like the last one. She explains that the last one is her twin sister Celica, and she's Celia. He waits for his adventurer card, and Celica appears with something to eat, so he starts eating, but notices she keeps staring at him like he's a celebrity caught at a fast food joint. She wants to verify his letter of recommendation, and Shinya finds out that the guildmaster is right behind him. They decide to talk, and the man introduces himself as Barlux. He places another letter of recommendation next to Shinya's, and Barlux sees that they resonate, so he knows it's genuine. He explains that letters of recommendation are valuable as they're the most reliable form of identification and grant access to many places, so many people try to steal them. It would be a disaster if it fell into the wrong hands, so he asks Shinya to destroy it if he can't protect it. But Shinya assures him that he'll be fine, and he can't do that after Tierra trusted him with it. Barlux is glad to hear this, and thinks they will get along well since they're both men recognized by the sanctuary. The next day, Shinya goes to get his adventurer card, and Celica sees that he's wearing new clothes while he thinks his other outfit was too flashy for a low-class adventurer. She gives him the guild card and explains that there are 9 ranks starting from G, and he can go up to SS rank by completing missions. But he can only accept jobs 2 ranks higher than his. Shinya takes on an herb collecting mission and says goodbye to her, while Celica thinks about how he seems different from the others. We see Shinya frustrated in the forest, probably wishing he was fighting more epic bosses instead of searching for plants like a medieval botanist. Shinya had been searching for hours and remembers that in the game, this mission was for beginners, like a tutorial for newbies. Suddenly, he notices an enemy on his radar, so he goes to investigate and discovers a skull-faced Jack with a level of 359. Finding a broken carriage nearby, he can't ignore it, so he decides to attack the undead menace. He wonders why an undead is holding a light sword and thinks it's a unique monster. He attacks it again, but it doesn't seem effective, and his sword is already damaged, looking more like a piece of scrap metal from a yard sale. With no other choice, he unlocks his limit. He charges again, this time eliminating the monster with 1 strike, like a hot knife through butter. The sword flies away, and he regrets it immediately because he wanted that shiny new toy. The monster drops a gemstone, so he decides to accept it as a consolation prize. Meanwhile, the sword lands in a castle, causing the guards to be more confused than a cat watching a ping pong match. They wonder what to do, so the second princess, Ryan, asks them to call an appraiser to analyze the sword and investigate who tossed it into the castle like a medieval frisbee. As Shinya walks through the city, he sees injured soldiers. The guard explains that a squad of 12 was attacked by the Skullface, but only 4 returned. Shinya realizes that the carriage belonged to them. The guard also mentions the sword thrown into the castle, so Shinya feels guilty for the trouble he's caused. He returns to the guild, and Celica notices that adventurers have gathered to defeat the Skullface, but Shinya reveals that he already killed it and shows the gem it dropped, leaving her in disbelief. Celica shouts that one person can't defeat a Skullface alone, but turns red from embarrassment as she gets too close. Her coworker Alice suddenly appears, and Celica tells her that Shinya defeated the Skullface Jack. He explains that he has no proof, as the equipment from the Skullface wasn't much, so he didn't bring it with him. Alice finds it strange since even rank B equipment can be worth a small fortune. She asks Celica to analyze the gemstone, as it should contain the Skullface's mana. Shinya wonders about the frequency of Skullfaces, and Alice explains that many people lose their lives in the northern forests due to the monsters. The ranks of the dead can merge with mana, creating the perfect environment for undead creation. However, the forest doesn't have much mana, so there shouldn't be a powerful undead. Shinya realizes it was an exception and reveals that its level was 359, which shocks both of them. Celica runs to analyze the stone, while Alice explains that if this is true, Shinya is stronger than a rank A group. Shinya asks her to keep it a secret since he doesn't want to draw attention. He goes to the restaurant, and while he waits, Celica explains that someone will share the table with him since they're full. A man suddenly appears with a legendary spear called Venom and sits next to him. He introduces himself as Avis and assumes Shinya is a new adventurer, but notices he's above average. Shinya explains that it's his third day, and he doesn't know much because he's from the countryside. Avis realizes that's why Shinya isn't afraid of him, and mentions that they call him a vampire because he hunts many undead. Shinya wonders if it's because Avis is pale, which makes everyone nervous, but Avis laughs and reveals that the real reason is his spear because it can drain life. Celia brings the food, so they enjoy their meal together. Later, Shinya goes to the library to research the decline of glory 500 years ago, but there aren't many records about it. Meanwhile, Barlux is in a meeting to talk about the Skullface. They wonder who would defeat a jack and not collect its armor, while Owls explains that he didn't find it impressive. The old man thinks those with letters of recommendation are strange, and they mention that on the day the Skullface was defeated, the sword was thrown into the castle. They wonder if the events are related. Barlux wonders what the sword looked like, so the knight Aldi reveals that the blade was 2 meters long, made of magical steel, and enchanted with the element of light, making it as powerful as the national treasure. Barlux is surprised it's a legendary grave weapon, and Aldi thinks they can't ignore someone who defeated a monster with that sword. Meanwhile, Shinya eats a skewer in the square and notices a girl staring at him. He offers her food and notices she doesn't look like a beggar. The girl, who has a tiger-like appearance, introduces herself as Millie, thanking him for the food. Avis suddenly appears and explains that Millie is an orphan from the church, so he always has to fetch her when she runs away. Shinya decides to go home, but Millie approaches him and whispers in his ear before leaving. That night, Shinya wonders why Millie asked him to rescue a fox in the forest. He thinks it might be a good pastime until Shay returns, but realizes he forgot to leave his message for Tierra. He goes to the Moon Sanctuary and asks Tierra to show Shay his sword when she sees her. He mentions that it can only be used by Amon Shay, or someone designated by them. Tierra realizes it's a powerful ancient weapon and is actually scared of it. Shinya thinks it must be because of its materials and mentions the monsters he defeated to create it. Tierra wonders why he keeps talking about legendary monsters. He asks her to keep it safe anyway and gives her letters to keep in touch, explaining that they will be able to reach him no matter where he is. She just has to write the person's name and say, send. But Tierra wonders why he doesn't send it directly to Shay, so he explains that he tried but kept failing. He tries using it with her, and she receives the letter, so it's working. Shinya figures it's because he hasn't met Shay in this new world yet. Tierra asks for more letters because she wants to be a mage and study the item. He thinks it's okay, so he gives her more before leaving. Shinya goes to the northern forest to look for the fox and keeps walking until he finds a shrine. He continues, but suddenly feels something. He finds a small fox inside the building and notices that it has a poison effect and is also cursed. He quickly cures it, but this revives an army of the undead. He summons his spear and starts eliminating the skeletons, mowing them down like weeds. He kills all of them, but the statues begin to break and 2 demons come out of them. He has never seen these monsters before, and they're level 6 and 74. They attack him, but he dodges and uses a skill called shadow binding, but they release a curtain to escape. He can't see anything, but the wolves keep attacking him. The fox suddenly shows him something, and he realizes it's the magic circle where it was, and the mist doesn't enter there, so he can use his skills. The wolves charge at him, but he uses his binding bow, eliminating them with 1 strike. The mist clears, and the fox jumps into his arms. He wonders what race it is, and discovers it's an elemental, one of the strongest monsters in the game. He has never heard of a baby version, but asks if it wants to go with him, and it jumps onto his head. He notices it understands him, and also realizes that some things are different from the game. Meanwhile, Shay receives Tierra's letter, wondering how she has this magical item, and is surprised to learn about her master. Shay suggests making a pact with the Elementali, explaining that it's like a partnership between a tamer and a monster, and it hides the monster's level and species so they can be together all the time. The fox seems excited, so Shinya creates the pact, and a symbol appears on both of them. He names her Yuzuwa, and she seems to like it. Shinya suddenly gets a message from Tierra because she managed to talk to Shay, and she's waiting for a response. He's happy with the news and decides to go to the guild. He reports the army of the undead he found in the forest, and he looks for a job. He notices a mission at the orphanage near the church and thinks it must be a special request since it has no rank. Plus, he remembers Millie lives there, so he decides to visit her and takes the job. He arrives at the church where a woman named Tria greets him. She asks if he came for the job, and he confirms this and also mentions Millie. They go to a room where he meets Millie, who gets excited and hugs him so hard he almost loses a lung. Shinya notices he's not a bad person, and it's been a long time since Millie got attached to someone like that, mainly because the last guy who tried to befriend her ended up running away from her infamous bear hugs. Shinya asks Millie if this is the fox she mentioned, so she confirms and thanks him, and he explains to Yuzuha that he could only rescue her her because of Millie. So Yuzuha thanks her, which is quite the leap for a fox who usually only talks when she wants food. He turns to Shinya and asks about the request, so she mentions it's about a skill successor, and Shinya realizes that apparently few people have skills now, especially the skill to properly dodge Millie's hugs. She explains that she's looking for a skill for him to teach, and Shinya wonders if it involves healing or poisoning, but she reveals it's purification. She knows it's hard to find, but gets surprised by Shinya's reaction and learns that he can teach it. But Shinya has a condition, saying he wants to know about Millie's powers and also wants her to share any information from the church because he needs to learn more about the world. She seems hesitant, but Millie explains that Shinya isn't a problem, except when it comes to keeping secrets, since he once told everyone she had a crush on a teddy bear, so she accepts his terms. Triya talks about Millie's powers and reveals that she has the title of Star Composer, so she has unexpected visions that never fail, like that time she predicted Shinya would trip over nothing and faceplant in front of everyone. Shinya notes that it's a powerful ability and mentions that many would want to take advantage of it, but she assures him that she told everyone to be discreet about it, despite Millie's occasional slip-ups. She tells him that an adventurer helps the orphanage because he used to be an orphan, and Shinya realizes she's talking about Avis as she explains that everyone is afraid of him, probably because he once mistook a clown for an undead and chased it out of town. So, the kids are safe, as long as they don't dress up as anything creepy. Shinya is ready to teach the skill, but she explains that she's not the one who's going to be learning the skill. She wants the granddaughter of the former priest to learn it, since things would be easier if she inherited the church. Later on, Yuzuha plays with the other orphans, and Shinya feels lonely because she's stealing all the attention. He wonders if Millie doesn't want to play with Yuzuha, but she thinks she can't compete with the older kids. But Yuzuha suddenly goes to his head, and Millie gets a chance to have her all to herself. So Shinya realizes her plan was to be close to him, using the oldest trick in the book, head cuddles. Anan suddenly appears and asks if he's the one who will save them, but he wonders what she means. She looks sad and reveals that they're about to close the orphanage, explaining that the church doesn't have a priest at the moment, so someone has to take over. He wonders why Triya doesn't do it, but she explains that it needs to be someone with a specific skill, and the person sent to take over the church wants to get rid of the orphanage. The granddaughter of the former priest has the right to inherit the church, but she still needs to have this skill. Shinya realizes why Triya needs him, but wonders why the priest wants to get rid of the orphanage. She mentions that it's because he only cares about money and probably had a bad experience with children who mistook his fancy robes for a napkin. Later on, Triya calls for Shinya and sees him with the other children. She introduces him to the granddaughter of the former priest, who introduces herself as Rasha, but bites her tongue in the process, making Shinya wonder if biting one's tongue runs in the family. Triya explains that she can be clumsy, but is hardworking. They start talking, but Avis suddenly appears to find out who accepted the job and discovers it was Shinya. He asks Shinya about his intentions, but Millie reassures him, so he realizes she saw something and decided to trust Shinya. He asks about the skill, so Shinya explains that Rasha can get it after defeating 200 undead creatures that are over level 150 while holding a sacred orb. They're shocked to hear this, mostly because it sounds like a video game side quest on nightmare difficulty. But he assures them that he can weaken the monsters for her to land the final blow, and he also has the orb, so it won't be that difficult. Rasha is speechless, but promises to do her best, so Avis decides to go with them, realizing that Shinya isn't a normal person, thinking there's only one explanation. Shinya is either crazy or crazy powerful, and he's betting on both. Avis calls Shinya for a drink and asks him if he's a chosen one, someone who has a title or knowledge that he shouldn't have. Shinya asks if it's like memories of a past life, but Avis explains that it's information about items and monsters. So Shinya doesn't think he's a chosen one. Shinya notices that Avis is caring and thinks he's a hero who protects the orphanage. Avis pretends it's because he gets annoyed by the kids crying, so Shinya smiles at how bad a liar he is. He sees a message from Tiara, mentioning that Shay said she'd come back soon, and Tiara is surprised by how much she asked about him. He suddenly gets another notification, so he checks it, and his letter of recommendation appears. Avis is surprised to see it and reveals that he has one too. so Shinya can't believe it, realizing that they have something in common, both being stuck in an endless chain of side quests. The next day, the trio goes to the Ghost Plains, where they encounter the undead. Shinya traps them with his barrier, while Avis breaks their legs to immobilize them, and Rasha finishes them off using healing magic, which damages the undead. They do this until they reach a barrier, which contains higher-level monsters. Avis uses his adventurer card to enter, and they keep weakening monsters so that Rasha can land the final hit, and Shinya explains that she'll be at level 150 when she learns purification. On the other side of the Ghost Plains, Ryan defeats a skull-faced Jack and is impressed with how much easier it is to beat them with her new sword. The knight is worried about the other group, but Shay offers to handle it. The group is desperate, and she arrives at the last minute, quickly defeating the undead and breaking its core, while everyone looks at her in shock. Shay quickly heals them, and the commander thanks her, knowing they would have been forced to retreat without her. Shay explains that it was only possible because they weakened the monster, but the commander knows that's not true. He remembers that several unusual undead have appeared in the last month, and still can't believe she took down a monster that his entire squad couldn't, realizing that this is the strength of someone who fought with the high humans. She decides to search the area in case there are more undead, reminding him they can call her using the items she gave them, and she runs through the forest eager to see her master again. Meanwhile, Avis faces a skull-faced Jack, and he easily defeats it, allowing Rasha to land the final blow. She's suddenly surrounded by a golden light, but Shinya assures her that's normal when learning a new skill, and her mind is flooded with thoughts on how to use purification. Shinya congratulates her, and Rasha realizes she can now save the orphans. He suggests they leave the area after resting, but Yuzuha suddenly senses a strange presence, and Shinya notices something in the sky, so Avis is worried. But Rasha thinks it's beautiful. Avis reveals that it's the magical matter of the undead, and when drained from the monsters, their forms disappear. All the material accumulates into one mass in the sky and falls in the form of a giant skull-faced Jack. Rasha is terrified, thinking it's the undead's way of saying thank you for defeating its minions by sending the big boss. And they discover it's a skull-faced lord, which is at level 804. It can easily destroy an entire nation, so Shinya thinks the seal might not hold. The creature suddenly leaps into the sky and punches the barrier, causing it to break. They can't believe it only took one hit, and Rasha falls to the ground in despair. They decide to flee, but the Lord roars, raising an army of undead to surround them, like a really bad encore at a rock concert, and he explains he's staying. Avis tries to talk to him, but Shinya removes his limiter and asks them to return to the city. Avis understands immediately, and Shinya casts a physical enhancement buff to help him escape. He clears a path for Avis, and after they leave, Shinya summons his sword. Yuzuha uses her fire to deal with the undead, but the Skull Lord keeps summoning more. Shinya launches a powerful attack, creating a crater in the ground, and goes to investigate. He checks his map and sees he's completely surrounded, but a blue marker suddenly appears, cutting through the undead army like a hot knife through zombie butter. He remembers that a blue marker means an ally, so he jumps to join her and finally meets Shay. They don't have much time alone, so Yuzawa raises a barrier so they can talk. She throws herself into his arms, and he says he's back as a tear runs down her face. Yuzawa's mana runs out, so they decide to deal with the Skull Lord first. Priorities, right? They use a combined spell, quickly killing the weaker undead like a couple of undead-slaying superheroes. And the Skull Lord also takes damage as Shinya summons another sword and takes the opportunity to land the finishing blow. It falls to the ground, demanding power before dying, and Shinya is shocked that a monster can talk. He retrieves the orb and suggests finishing their conversation. So, where were we? Oh, right, life stories, he says. He explains that after defeating the boss and freeing everyone from the game, a portal threw him 500 years into the future, which was not in the user manual. Shay reveals that she and the other support characters didn't disappear after he cleared the dungeon, so they waited for their masters. But the continent was thrown into chaos after the incident, so the group decided to split up to help control the disasters. And she later returned to the Moon Sanctuary. She's happy to find her master again, but he begs her to stop calling him master since she's a legend now, and it will attract too much attention. He asks her to call him by his name, but they blush when she does, turning a battle reunion into a high school romance moment. She wonders what he'll do next, and he talks about his plan to visit the sacred place and find clues about how to return. She has been there, but admits she couldn't investigate much. And she's also sad to know that Shinya wants to go back to his world. The day breaks, so they decide to return to the sanctuary to organize a celebration party for their reunion. She notices Yuzuha, and he explains she's an elemental, but he realizes she now has 3 tails. She suddenly starts talking, making Shinya jump out of his skin. Shinya freaks out as she explains that this ability was restored when he defeated the Skull Lord. Shinya thinks it's because he was a boss, but he asks the fox not to talk in front of people and also to merge her 3 tails into one to avoid attention. She follows his instructions, asking if she's a good girl. Shay finds her cute, so he lets her pet Yuzuha. He remembers Avis and Rasha, so he decides to catch up with them before they reach the guild. We see Avis running with Rasha, who looks like she's seen a ghost. Avis senses something approaching, so they prepare to fight, but discover it's just Shinya, as Rasha faints in fear. Classic Rasha. Meanwhile, Ryan arrives at the battle site and wonders who could have made such a powerful attack. And she also remembers the attack that got rid of the undead. A soldier named Gajras interrupts her, showing her the blade found in the ravine, and he recognizes the falcon emblem on the hilt. He demonstrates the blade's power, telling her it's almost broken, but it still holds immense power. It's like a sword on steroids. He thinks that the only one capable of forging swords of this caliber is the Ebon blacksmith, the most skilled artisan among the high humans. Ryan is surprised, since high humans are extinct, and Gajras admits they can't be sure, but the person responsible is strong enough to treat such a weapon as disposable. She remembers that the blacksmith owns the Moon Sanctuary, so she suggests they visit the place. Gajras wonders what she'd do if found out that a high human is still alive. She declares she'd challenge him to a duel, but wouldn't mind marrying him. Dodgers pleads with her not to attack him, just to test his skill, and she assures him she has more sense than that, but he isn't so sure. Meanwhile, Avis demands that Shinya explain himself after seeing his relationship with Shay. She's happy to see him again, but Avis insists on knowing what happened. Shinya tries to lie, saying she defeated the boss, but Avis points his spear at him, making Shinya sweat like a politician in a debate.